Hello and welcome to our Embed, Deploy, Relax InterBase XE for Windows and Mac webinar. My name is Stephen Ball and I'm an Embarcadero Technical Sales Consultant for EMEA. Also joining me on the line is Al Manarino, Embarcadero Technical Sales Consultant for the Americas. Last time, Al took us over how InterBase is part of our daily life. Either embedded due to its full-featured small footprint options, or running single-user to 1,000-user workgroup applications. InterBase began around 1984, and the focus was to provide developers with a powerful tool for building data-centric applications. The result today is a very robust, full-featured, ANSI-compliant data server that supports most popular development languages, including Delphi, C++, Java, ADO.NET, PHP, and Ruby. It is high performance, highly scalable, and provides the security features needed to protect sensitive data and help customers meet compliance obligations. InterBase is self-managing, requires near-zero administration, and it has a very small footprint, which means there's more capacity on a system for application functionality. InterBase is a relational database that doesn't get in the way. A key thing that we will be touching on a little bit later is how even with InterBase XE, it is fully featured, small footprint, ANSI SQL relationship database management system in all versions and does not compromise features in the small embedded versions, unlike some other databases that are out there. InterBase is built for developers and business partners. InterBase is powerful and reliable, secure, scalable, and has high availability and performance, and flexible footprint which allows you to do more with less hardware. InterBase is self-managing with near-zero administration, which keeps our customers operational and worry-free. And unlike open source offerings, InterBase is fully backed by Embarcadero Technologies support and engineering teams. So I hope that's refreshed your memories on what we picked up last time. And if you weren't with us last time, then the webinar is available for replay through the Embarcadero website. In this webinar, you will learn about the changing landscape of Windows versus Mac in the business arena and how Mac is now of growing interest to business application developers. We will look at the differences between the InterBase versions that you can see, each of which is fully featured, and the platforms they support. We will also have a look at InterBase in action across Windows and Mac and some tips and tricks for using them. So, let's ask, why would you want a business database on Windows and also on Mac? Forrester Research, along with many other research companies, have for considerable time advised that Mac has no place in the business enterprise. However, recent cost analysis and productivity work has led them to reverse this advice. In fact, Forrester are now telling IT teams to be prepared for the Mac invasion due to the productivity increases they can bring. And in fact, research from Gartner as well is showing that CIOs expect to support 3 devices per person going into 2012. The great news is that Embarcadero has the tools today to help you get ready for the Mac and Windows business world. Rad Studio XE2 with FireMonkey brings you a multi-target development platform that you can use with Delphi and C++ Builder to build fast, native business applications. And with InterBase supporting it, you have an infrastructure that truly is multi-platform, unlike using, for example, MS SQL as your server. To back up the research from Forrester, let's look at some of the stats. Mac definitely is on the rise, and you can see here, in the business world alone, 66% year-on-year growth last time. For a long time, Windows has been thought of as the operational system for the office, but the sales show that Mac is making headway into the working world. Here we can again see that every single continent worldwide, Mac sales are on the up. The great news with the changing landscape of the software usage and the rise of Mac is that InterBase is already a multi-platform database today. InterBase is already found on servers running Windows, Mac, Linux and Solaris. So you know it will support you and your applications where and when you need to move operational platforms. Why is this important? Well, it helps you save money at the same time as serving your customers' changing needs. Our future is one where business apps must be available to the systems our customers choose, and that no longer means just thinking about Windows. For small and large software vendors alike, the key to keeping our costs down is an infrastructure that is common and easy to learn, use and manage. InterBase fits this bill perfectly, and on top of that it has a near zero administration. InterBase is a key part of achieving this once and done approach to development that we all desire. So let's have a look at the different versions of InterBase. InterBase comes in many editions across Windows, Mac, Linux and Solaris, and the grid here shows how they fit. With the Developer Edition, InterBase Developer Edition allows software developers to freely develop InterBase applications before they deploy them. All the functionality of InterBase Server is included with the Developer Edition. The Developer Edition severs all database connections every 48 hours, preventing it from being deployed in a production environment, but still allowing ample time for testing in a development environment. Developer Edition is self-contained and does not support add-on InterBase licenses, such as additional users. However, out of the box it will work with 4 cores and up to 20 users, which means you can be testing with 80 simultaneous connections. You can also have a trial license of InterBase, and the InterBase Server trial license allows you to test drive and develop with InterBase for 90 days, and this will use 8 CPU cores and 20 simultaneous users. For trial and developer editions, then please visit the downloads.embarcadero.com/free/InterBase URL. InterBase Server Edition is a lightweight yet scales to handle hundreds of users. Server Edition allows hundreds of simultaneous users to connect to the database and provides enterprise features such as at-rest and over-the-wire data encryption. Typical InterBase Server applications are networked, multi-user applications such as web-based product catalog applications or ERP systems, and centrally located databases for CRMs, etc. Volume pricing is available for 5, 10, 25 and 50 users and is licensed per server and simultaneous user. Embed amazing power directly inside your application processes. To-Go Edition also runs in a standalone environment, but allows development of applications which directly utilize the InterBase Engine DLL. With no separate database server process running, the database engine is executed in the application process space. InterBase To-Go provides the robust RDBMS functionality of InterBase in an extremely small footprint. Target applications for the To-Go edition include embedded devices, public kiosks, as well as ISVs, OEMs and VAR applications that are built using InterBase. Used in the To-Go edition form, InterBase does not have to be separately installed on any server or end-user workstation. Volume pricing again is available for 20 and 100 user connections and is licensed per deployment. InterBase Desktop, you can build amazing single-user, fully featured and cost-effective applications. InterBase Desktop Edition provides a powerful RDBMS for standalone single-user applications. Desktop Edition is for use with or embedding in applications that can deploy on desktop, laptop or mobile computers for use by a single end user. Typical applications are standalone applications such as product catalog applications used by field sales organizations, or a dedicated system for signal data collection and analysis. Volume pricing is available for 20 and 100 desktops and is licensed per desktop. InterBase is very easy to get started with. It is included with the Embarcadero IDEs, including RAD Studio, Delphi, C++ Builder, RAD PHP, and Prism. InterBase allows you to deploy your database on Windows and then move it to Mac if you so desire for deployment. InterBase can be used with Embarcadero's database tools, including RapidSQL and DB Change Manager. InterBase includes the easy-to-use IB Console GUI tool for Windows, free of charge. InterBase includes the ability to create dynamic SQL from stored procedures and execute statements as one of the many new features that were introduced in XE. Okay, so now we have a good understanding of why InterBase is important for our product investment today and also into the future. Let's look at how easy it really is to use. Let's start with the most commonly used edition, the Server Edition. Last time we saw InterBase up and running out of the box in under 3 minutes. This time, let's have a look at the cool options InterBase brings to us and get it up and running on both Windows and also on Mac. Okay, so here we are ready to install InterBase onto the Mac. I've downloaded the install files and we have the installer here ready to run, so let's launch that. Now we need to enter an administration password to install software, which is typical per Mac or Unix based. So let's just click the lock to make the changes, and I'm going to enter my system password. And you'll see this is now running the InterBase installer. So we have our welcome, we have terms and conditions that we can go through to agree. We're then able to set if this is a client only or if it's a server and client install. And we're going to use the server and client install here. We're then able to choose if we'd like to set up for multiple instances, as InterBase can run with multiple instances on the same machine, but we're just going to say no here and we'll use the default instance. You have the option to change where you'd like it installed. However, I'm going to leave it with the default, which puts it into the applications folder. And here's a summary of what's going to happen. So we're going to get InterBase XE installed. It's going to be installed into the InterBase folder in Applications, and it's going to have an instance of GDS_DB, which is the default instance name for InterBase, running on port 3050. And it's now running through and installing InterBase. Now at this point you will be asked, and you need to have ready your serial number, and if you have a developer edition then you'll get this registering through your developer accounts. I'm just going to enter my serial number here and my username, password, and hit register. once you've registered, you'll then see a finish button, and it tells you at the top here, registration completed successfully for InterBase XE Server Edition with one user. We then get confirmation that InterBase has indeed been successfully installed into the application's InterBase folder, and InterBase is now installed onto the Mac. Now there's one last thing that we need to do, and this is to do with security on Unix-based systems. Now on Windows we're used to having a firewall because everything's open, where on Unix-based systems everything's shut by default. So we need to open up and allow connections in on port 3050 to our InterBase server. And to do that we're going to have to create a hosts equivalent file. So we're going to go to terminal, and this needs to be placed in the etc folder. So we just cd/etc, and from here we're going to use the vi program with administrator access, so type sudo space vi space and then the file name, so it's gds_hosts.equiv. Now the details for this are all in the operation guide, which is available from docs.embarcadero.com/interbase. Now once we've opened up this new file, we need to put it into insert mode, so we press escape and then the letter I and add a plus sign, and that's a kind of a wild card. It's saying let anybody who talks to my computer on this port connect in. You can also kind of type in specific computer names if you want to only allow specific computers to have access to InterBase. So now we have that done, I'm going to hit escape to finish insert mode and type a full colon to give me access to the kind of command prompt on VI, and write and quit, which is WQ. So I now have my hosts.equiv file set up for InterBase, and we should now be able to connect and use our InterBase server. So let's go to Applications, and we'll now see we have InterBase installed in our applications. Within the bin directory we have a number of utilities. The one we're going to have a look at first is the ISQL, and ISQL is the command line interface into InterBase, and ISQL is available on Windows and Mac. On Windows we also have a GUI version of this with some enhanced features which is called IB Console, and we're going to use the Mac version for the moment though. So let's start off by connecting to a database. So we type the connect command, and then we need to put in the path to the actual file. So luckily within the examples directory we have an example database, and here is the employee.gdb. So I'm going to drag and drop onto the ISQL window, and you can see it'll copy the path in completely. Now this is quite useful, especially because Mac is case sensitive and it saves trying to type it out manually. And you do need to put the full colon, the semicolon at the end of the command line. So we can now see that by executing that command we're now attached to the database, and from here we can have a look at the data. So we can, for example, say show tables, and this will give us a list of the tables on the database. So if we wanted to have a look at specifically the let's choose the employee table, we could say show table employee, and we can see now that we've got a lot of data about the employee table. So we can see it's got an employee number. Let's just open this up a little. It's got an employee number, which is a small int and not null. We've got a first name, which is a varchar 15 and not null, and so on. We can also see, for example, the department number here is a char of 3 characters, not null, and we have a check in place to make sure the value is either 000 or the value is greater than 0 and less than 999, or is null. So interesting information about the keys and so on as well. So quite a lot of rich information you can get through the command line of ISQL. We can equally have a look at some data, so we could type select star from employee and get the data back as well. Okay, so that's how we can start using. I'm just going to actually just type quit here, and quit will roll back any changes I've made and close me out. Let's also have a look at how we can start and stop InterBase using IB Manager. So again, we're going to open up a terminal window, and I'm going to run this as sudo because this is going to actually affect the InterBase server running. So I'm just going to drag and drop here IB Manager in, and let's run that. So now we have IB Manager running. We can type in help to have a view of the options available to us, and we'll notice here the two that we're interested in here are starting and shutting down the server. So if we type in shut -now, we need to put in password, and the basic system password is always going to be master key, and that will shut down the InterBase server. So we're now unable to connect to the InterBase server if we wish to. We can also start up the server just by running IB Manager and typing start. And that will then go and launch the server and return back if the server's been successfully started or not. If you have any problems with starting and stopping the server, then always have a look at the InterBase log file that's produced in the InterBase directory, which is very, very useful. There's also some really useful information in the README and the registration FAQs if you get stuck at any points. Okay, so that's very quickly how to get InterBase up and running on a Mac. And let's now have a look at using InterBase on the PC to connect to a database and view some data, start and stop the server, and also let's remotely connect through to our Mac just to prove that connection's working from another machine. So to help me out here, we've got a virtual machine set up, and on here we've got InterBase that we installed in our last video. So I'm just going to go straight and open up IB Console, and because I've been using it quite a lot recently, we can see it's straight there, but if we go to Start, Embarcadero, InterBase, we can see IB Console is listed there as well, along with the InterBase Server Manager. So let's open up IB Console to start. Now, as this is the first time that we've used IB Console, we can see it's asking for servers that we'd like to connect to. Now, I'm just going to put in localhost, and we can give it an alias if we want. So if we want to give this a name that means something to us in the list, like my computer, and we can confirm if we're registering or if we want to log in with our username password. And there we are, we now have our connection completed. Now you notice on the server here there's two green things. There's the tick to say we're connected, So if we right click and choose log out, we can see that now turns into a cross. But there's also a little green dot on the server, and that means IB Console is able to connect to that server even though we've not logged into it yet. So now we've seen how easy it is to add a server. Let's add another one. Just go to server, add, and this time we're going to add the name of my Mac and connect across the network to the Mac. And now we can see that we now have a remote connection and it's succeeded and we're connected across to the Mac. Now, to show how straightforward it is to connect to a database, let's connect to my computer first, and we're going to add a database, and the file for the database is going to be the employee database. And the alias name for that will be employee, and it's defaulted to sysdba, which is our current username password. And if we say OK, we can now see we're connected through, and we now have a very easy to use view of that database. So we can see the domain names that have been added for the tables, for the fields, sorry. We can see the tables that are there and any notes that have been added about the tables. And we'll be looking at InterBase IB Console in more detail in one of our follow-up sessions. But it's very easy to work your way through here and graphically see what is on the database and who owns what, and even kind of double click on the tables and get straight through to being able to see data, permissions, the metadata, properties and so on, and even being able to edit everything from within here as well. So let's add the database, the same database, onto the Mac, and I'm just going to go to Data, Add, and we've got the same demo database installed on the Mac, and that is in Applications, InterBase, Examples, Employee.gdb. Now remember that on the Unix-based systems, the file name, the file path, is all case sensitive, so just be careful as you type that in. And we can now see we're connected through, and we can view the data on the Mac in just the same way as we do on the PC hosted database. So even with a Mac install, you can gain the power of IB Console if you have an InterBase client anywhere on your network running on a Windows machine. Now we can see how to start and stop InterBase. As we said earlier, if we go to the InterBase folder in Program Manager, and if we go to the InterBase Server Manager, and we just need to allow this program to run. Here we have a very easy to use start stop button, and we can have this automatically or manually started. We can also view the server properties here, so we can see on this machine I have a 25 user license installed, and we can view the Guardian properties as well. Guardian's a process that runs that helps keep InterBase up and running in case it ever needs to restart. Okay, so very easy to start and stop the server. Just click on Start and Stop. Now, just as on the Mac we have ISQL, we also have ISQL on the PC. So if we go to, let's go to our InterBase bin directory, we can see here we have ISQL. So let's run that and use the connect command to connect to our database. So just as before, we type connect and then the path of the database. So C Barcadero InterBase examples. And on Windows there's a database folder currently which has employees.gdb in it. Now as I hit enter, we then get the con, which is a continuation of the SQL statement, and I'm going to type in user sysdba, and then if we type password master key. Now unlike the Mac where the system user can automatically log you in, on Windows we have to specify the user and the password. And it would help if I actually close the quotes, so let's just abandon this one and try again with a closed quote. That's a bit better. And now we are connected through to the database. So again we can say show tables, we can say show table employee, and again we see the same data that we saw on the Mac. Now we can also do the select star from table. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you a little trick that you can use, and sometimes using ISQL it's not particularly easy to read all this data across. So you can do set list and then rerun the previous statement, and you can now see it comes out in a list format rather than across the screen, which makes it a lot easier to understand the data. To revert back, just type set list again and it will toggle it back to the previous format. We've seen how to install, how to start and how to stop InterBase. We've also got to grips with connecting to a database and running some simple ISQL statements, and we've also had a look at how to connect to databases using IB Console. The last thing that we need to do is have a look at character sets. And character sets are very important when it comes to running multi-platform databases. Not every platform will have the same default character set, so we need to define what our default character set will be as we create our database. So let's have a look at that by creating a database. Let's open ISQL, and this time we can create a database. So let's do create database, and we need to give it the path. So we're going to say applications, InterBase examples, and we'll call this my new test db.gdb. And that has now created our database, and by default that will automatically connect us to that database as well. So if we go and have a look, we should now be able to find my new test db within the examples directory. My new test db. Good, so let's create a table in there. and we'll give this table a name called foo, and we'll have an ID which is an integer, and we can set that as not null, and some data, and we'll have that as a varchar 20. So we should now be able to insert into foo values 1, hello, and insert into foo values 2, world, and commit. So if we now select star from foo, we can see now we have 2 records in our data table. We can still work with the show tables, and if we do show table foo, we can see the structure of the table that we just created. So all very good. Now let's go and connect to that database from our PC. So on IB Console, we're going to add a new database, and this is under Applications, InterBase Examples, and it's my new testdb.gdb. Now we can set the default character set here, so we can choose whatever we want out of the list, and we've chosen UTF-8, so we can just choose UTF-8 as our default character set to work with this database, and it's recommended that you use the default character sets. And we can see here that there's one table, and we can double click here, we can view the metadata, and we can see the data as well. So if we change this to hello big, and let's commit and refresh that, we should now be able to pop back to the Mac and see that update. So let's do select star from foo. And I think we might just need to commit first. And the reason for that is InterBase runs transactional views. So as you start your transaction, that's the snapshot of the data that you will see. And when you finish your transaction, you'll then be able to commit up to the recent point. So by running a commit command, we're able to refresh our view of the data so we can see the changes that are coming whilst we're running our scripts. Okay, so really easy to get InterBase up and running. Let's now have a look at connecting to InterBase programmatically. And for this, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Al Manarino, who's going to show us how to hook up and use some of the really cool data connectivity options within Delphi and C++ Builder. Finally, we'll have a look at UDFs, which are user-defined functions. We'll write one using Delphi and then compile it so we can use it on multiple platforms. UDFs are a great way to be able to expand the SQL language that is already very feature-rich with InterBase.
Thanks, Stephen. That was all good, showing how you can easily get InterBase up and running on both Windows and the Mac. My name's Al Manarino, and I'm one of the Embarcadero technical sales consultants in the Americas. For the next few minutes, I'll be quickly showing you the different ways you can connect to InterBase programmatically using Embarcadero's RAD tools. I'll be showing you how to use both InterBase Express often called IBX, and DB Express. Now, for those of you on this webinar that don't know already, with the new release of Rad Studio XE2, many customers are excited to benefit from XE2's capabilities from a multi-platform perspective. XE2 has a new application framework called FireMonkey, so that we as developers can now create these visually stunning HD and 3D applications like we see on the screen on Windows, Mac OS X, and the iOS platform. So now I'm going to start up my Rad Studio XE2 and we'll see how you can connect to InterBase programmatically. So here I am in Embarcadero Rad Studio XE2. Now the first thing I want to do is create a new FireMonkey HD application. So I'm given my default form, and I see in my tool palette under my DB Express components I have these 8 DB Express components, and under my InterBase Express components I have these 16 InterBase components, and in addition under IBX administrative components I have an additional 8 IB administrative components. Now for DB Express, these components, it's a framework, it's a database framework from multiple databases of choice. So DB Express is a server independent approach, and DB Express is a as thin as possible layer between your app and the database. Now IBX, this is a set of components that wraps the APIs of the InterBase database server. So building apps with InterBase and IBX should work better and faster and give you more control over InterBase features. For example, with the IBX components, we have this set of administrative components specifically built for InterBase. So first I'm going to show you how to use IBX to connect to InterBase. So to build an app that uses IBX, I need to add at least 3 components either onto my form or inside of a data module. So one of the components I need is my IB database. Now this IB database component, this is used to set up the IB database connection. It also allows me to create databases, test the connection, and access system data. The next component I need is a transaction component, IB transaction. Now this IB transaction, this gives me complete control over my transactions. So it's important in InterBase to use transactions explicitly and to isolate each transaction properly using the snapshot isolation level for reports and the read committed level for interactive forms. So each data set explicitly refers to a given transaction, so you can have multiple concurrent transactions against the same database and choose which data sets take part in which transactions. So that's a very cool feature of InterBase. And I also now need to add a dataset component. So for dataset components, I can either pick a table component or a query component or a stored procedure component. So for this app, I'm going to select a IB table component. This IB table component will allow me to access a single table or a view. Now my other dataset component options was a IB query, and IB query lets me execute a SQL query returning a result set, and this IB query component could be used together with the IB update SQL component to obtain a live or editable dataset, or I could have also choose to use the IB stored proc component, and this component would let me execute a stored procedure. Now we get to add properties to our components. So first, for our database, I'm going to use the sample DB demos database that comes with Rad Studio. So for my IB database component, for its database name, I'm going to give it a sample DB demos database that comes with Rad Studio. And for its default transaction, I'm going to give it our IB transaction component. So also on my IB database component, I have a property called server type. So for this application, I'm connecting to the InterBase server. My other option is to use the IB embedded. That's the InterBase to go edition. So I either have the choice of connecting to an InterBase server or to the InterBase to go edition. So that's also pretty cool. So next, let's move on to our IB transactions component, and we see from our IB transactions component property, our default transaction is to do a commit, and the default database we're going to use is our IB database component, and that points to our sample DB demos database. So that's all set. Next, let's move on to our IB table component and set its properties. So first, for its database property, it's going to be our IB database component that points to our DB demos database. It's also going to use our IB transactions component. And what table name do we want to use for our transaction? So for this case, I'm going to select table name. And if you recall from our IB database component property, I had login prompt set to true. So anytime I'm going to access this table or this database, it wants me to log in. So I give it my username and password. And my password, and let's say OK and connect. So now that we're connected, we see our list of tables. So for this application, I'm going to choose the bio life table. So that's all great. So our app is now connected to InterBase using IBX, and that's just great. So now let's access the InterBase data and display it on our form. Now recall, this is a FireMonkey application, and with FireMonkey we use live bindings, and live bindings, that's our new binding mechanism to be able to bind data to any object, and live bindings also gives us cross-platform features. So the first thing I want to do is drop a data access component onto my form. So I'm going to use my data source component. Now for this data source component, I want to set its dataset property to be our table. And now, for those of you who are not familiar with this BioLife table, it stores fish and the properties of the descriptions of those fish. So I want to display pictures of the fish and information about the fish onto my form. So to do that, I'm going to drop an image component onto my form. So I'll drop an image control component, and I want to use this component to display the picture of the fish. Now this bio table also has a column called notes that has descriptions on the fish. So to display the notes information, I'm going to use a memo component and drop that onto my form. So the notes attribute I want to display in this memo box right here. Now the notes information is a long string of description, so I want that information to word wrap inside of my memo component. So I have a property called word wrap, and I'm going to set that to true. Now also in my BioLife table, I have a column called common name. So I want to display the common name of the fish on top here, and to use that, I'm going to use a label to display the common name. So I'm going to drop a label onto my form. So on this label, I want the label to display the common name of the fish inside of the database. So that's great. And the last thing I want to do is I want to drop a grid onto my form and display all the other detailed information of all of the attributes in my table. So I want to add a grid onto my form. So I want to make sure I put it onto my form. I want to drop a grid. I have a string grid. I'm going to select it, drop it onto the form, and make it as large as possible. So it fills up the whole form. And while I'm here, I can resize and make this all large for me. So I'll make a nice large memo component, move it over here, and we'll get a nice larger image component. And the label will move over here. Alright, so that's all done, and that looks great. So now next, using the power of live bindings, I can now connect my individual columns, my individual field definitions from my BioLife table to my individual components. So for my image component, I'm going to say link it to a database field, and I want my image component to be the graphic inside of my database. And by doing that, you see these two non-visual components get added onto the form. One is called bind scope DB, and the other one's called binding listings. So bind listings is going to keep track of all the bindings I create, and bind scope DB, that's there because I'm connecting database objects to components. For my memo component, I want to link this to the notes column in my database. Say OK to that. For my label, I want to link this to the common name of the fish in my database. And lastly, for my string grid, I want to link it to my database source. So in this case, it's the bind scope DB, which will link to the table component that are already connected to my application. So that's all great. Now, to activate the data at design time and see data displayed on my form, all I need to do is go into my IB table component and set active to be true. And look at that. That is just awesome. So using the power of FireMonkey and live bindings, I was able to bind data from my database to individual components and display it on my form. So that's just wonderful. So now let's run this application and see what it looks like. So recall, this is a FireMonkey application. So because it's FireMonkey application, it's a cross-platform application. So right now I've created this as a Windows 32-bit Windows application. So let's run it and see what it looks like. And because I have my login prompt set to true, it prompts me for my ID and password. And now connect. So FireMonkey application using IBX, connecting to my InterBase database, displaying the live values on my form. And because of live bindings, as I navigate through the grid, it updates my my graphics information and my notes information. So that's great. So once again, the power of FireMonkey and InterBase and the IBX connection gives me this really powerful capability. So that's all great. Now what's even greater is I can take this Windows FireMonkey and InterBase app and cross-compile it and deploy it onto my Mac. So let me quickly show you how to do that. So here in my Rad Studio XE2, I have a target platform node. I can right-click on it, say Add a Platform. So here I have the options of either creating a Windows 64-bit application or a Mac OS X application. So I'll select Mac OS X. It adds my Mac OS X node here. So now when I activate that node and I go and run and build this project, it's going to create a standalone executable, deploy it onto my Mac, and I can execute it on my Mac. So let me show you that very quickly. So my environment here, I'm running my Windows environment inside of VMware Fusion. So I have both my Mac and my Windows on the same box. So when this application got deployed, it got deployed here. So here's my FireMonkey IBX project. So when I click it on the Mac, it runs as a Mac application. So that's really cool. So in the 1 minute that I have left, let me quickly take you back into Windows and Rad Studio and show you how we can use DB Express to connect to InterBase also. So recall a few minutes ago I defined DB Express as a database framework for multiple databases of choice. So DB Express is a server independent approach, and DB Express is a as thin as possible layer between your app and the database. So to show this, I'm going to use a new project. So I'm going to close my existing project. Let me reopen an InterBase using DB Express project. So here's a visual project that uses DB Express to connect to InterBase and display its data on this grid. So this project could either be a Delphi project, a C++ builder project, or a RAD PHP project. So all those types of projects using DB Express will all connect to InterBase the same way. Now, a standard visual application based on DB Express uses these components. So the first component, the SQL connection component. So this component is similar to the IB database component for IBX we just used previously. And it provides the connection with the database and the proper DB Express driver. So here we see the InterBase driver that's going to be used with DB Express to connect to InterBase. The next component, the SQL dataset. So this component, this is hooked to the connection using the SQL connection property. So this SQL component tells me what SQL query to execute or table to open by using the command type and the command text properties. The next component, the dataset provider. So this component, connected with the dataset, extracts the data from the SQL dataset and can generate the proper SQL update statements. The next component, the client dataset component. So this reads from the data provider and stores all of the data into memory. So if its packet records property is set to -1, that's what it will do. And lastly, we have the data source. So this data source component allows you to surface the data from the client dataset to the visual data aware controls, same as we did with the IBX example. Now, to display the data, I'm using this database grid, and this database grid is connected to my data source. And finally, I have a DB navigator also connected to the data source to help me navigate through the data, and also allows me to insert, update, and delete data from my database. So that's all very cool. So let's run this application and see what it does. So I come up to run. Let's run without debugging. It compiles, it builds, and it runs. And I can now navigate through the data using the grid, or I can use the navigation bar to also go, first record, last record. I can also, move up, move down. So this works great. So this was a quick example on how I can use DB Express and connect to InterBase and display its data. So that works great also. So to summarize what I did and what you can do with InterBase and RAD Studio and the DB Express drivers and the InterBase Express drivers. So let me reopen the FireMonkey IBX project we were working on. Still wants my password. So we can develop our apps with the InterBase Developer Edition that comes with RAD Studio XE2, or you can download the InterBase Developer Edition from the Embarcadero website, and you can deploy your apps with any of the InterBase editions. So with RAD Studio XE2, I can create clients that can run on Windows, Mac OS X, and the iOS platform, but I can have my InterBase database server running on any of the 4 InterBase supported platforms. So that could either be Windows 32-bit or Windows 64-bit, Mac OS X, Linux, and or Solaris. And the good news is you do not need to make any changes in your application to target a remote InterBase database server other than the database URL. So now at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Stephen, who's going to show us InterBase user-defined functions, UDFs, on multiple platforms. So thank you.
So thanks, Al. Yeah, we're going to have a look now at writing a really simple UDF function. So I've created here a new project, a new library. So literally from File, New, Other, Dynamic Link Library. And I've added to this library a unit which we've written here, which has got a function called modulo, and that passes in 3 integer values and a default value. And we're going to take value A and mod it with value B to give us the result. And the only time we're not going to be able to do that is if value B is 0. We don't want to have a divide by 0 error, in which case if it's 0, then we'll return the default value back. So you could pass in -1, or you could say, well, we'll just put it as 0 if it's 0. So very, very simple function written in straightforward code. Now the only thing that we do need to do is we need to make sure that for cross-platform compatibility we have the exports clause in the same unit as the actual function. So hence we have modulo in here, and then we're exporting modulo within the same unit. And quite typically in the past we've had exports have been in the actual main file, but we're going to put them into the actual specific unit rather than the DPR. And the other thing that we need to do is on the Mac there is a naming convention for functions, for methods that are exposed, that they have an underscore at the start, and we need to maintain that to make everything work on the Mac. So we have this little ifdef here which gives us a prefix to go on the start of the module name. But that gives us our really straightforward code for producing a standard library. And if we go and build this, we can build it here for Windows and for Mac. And what we need to do now is we've got our module. We need to now go and make sure that it actually is in the UDF directory. So if we go and have a look in our Embarcadero InterBase UDF folder, and we can see here I've got it set to automatically compile out to that path already using the project options. But we can see our demo udf.dll is here, and that file is the library that we now need to go and reference in InterBase. So if we open up IB console, and on the employee database, I've already been in, we have external functions here, and we have one for modulo, so we've said we've got a function. Now for SQL I'm going to call it f_modulo so I can reference it, and it passes in 3 integers and it returns an integer by value, and the entry point, so the function name within the library is modulo, and the module name is demo UDF. So if we have a look over here we can see demo UDF, that's our module, so that all references through. Now what we can do is we can edit that in here if we need to make any changes to the parameters. Now once we have that written, we're able to go and reference it in code. So let's go and have a look at the department table, and if we select, let's have the department number, the manager number, and if we do f modulo, so this is now our external function, and I'm going to just pass in these numbers because I know they're some integer numbers from department. Department C. We can now see that when we have a null being passed in, if we just pull the SQL back up, we're getting our defaults. So when it's a 0 that we're dividing by, we're getting our -1, which is our default, and 600 divided by moduled by 2, there's no remainder left over. 185 gives us a module of 15. So we've got a really good new function now within our SQL that we can use. Now we can do the same thing if we just keep this statement here. We can do the same thing on the Mac. And I've got a link here to my Mac and to the employee database, and I've already been in and registered fmodulo, and you'll see the only thing that's slightly different here is the module name. As I compile up for the Mac, it's actually given me a slightly different name by default, so I could change that within the file, but I'm just going to keep with the standard. And here we now have our definitions across, and this is now a database that is on the Mac, so we need to make sure that that file is on the Mac as well. So as we go and compile, we can use the deployment manager here, to send the file over to the Mac using PA Server. And you'll notice that there's also this redistributed file that is created, this libcgunwind.1.0.dylib. Now that file is actually required by any library that we create for the Mac. So if we go and have a look in our Mac, and let's actually go and have a look at Finder. I'm going to go to Applications, to InterBase, to the UDF folder. I've copied in my DLL into here, my libdemo_udf, but also into the library folder here, I've copied in my libcgunwind.1.0.dylib. Now the library folder is a folder that's available as part of the path for InterBase. So because the UDF requires it, we need to put it into one of the specifically pathed folders, and popping it in the UDF folder isn't actually, strangely enough, part of the core path. So we add that into the library folder or into the bin folder, and our UDF is then available ready to work. So if we just pop back here, we can connect across, and on the Mac we're able to run the same code and get the same result. So that's a very, very quick introduction to UDFs and how simple they are on Windows and Mac, and that you can do those with Delphi. We're going to be looking at some more involved UDF examples in the series of videos that we'll be producing shortly for InterBase Labs, so do come back and check out those at that point. Wow, what a session! We've learned and seen so much about InterBase and how exactly simple and easy it is to use on multiple platforms, which really gives us and our support teams a great chance to be able to learn and use and deploy a very simple database engine that is fully featured and lightweight. Now, time for some Q&A.